Hello everyone, I'm Susie, and today I'm going to share with you how I have successfully raised bilingual children here in France. Well, my parenting job isn't done yet. My kids are only 14 and almost 10, so the jury's still out on how successful I've been with my parenting overall. But they definitely speak two languages. That part I'm pretty confident I got right. So whether you're an expat parent in a mixed language relationship or you just want to give your kids the gift of bilingualism, I hope this video will be useful for you. I've been living here in Dijon, France for 16 years now, and here on my channel I talk about life in France and other topics that are important to me. I'm American, and my two kids were born here in France and have always lived here in France. The amazing thing, they're totally bilingual in French and English. Today I'm going to walk you through our journey and share some insights that I hope might be helpful for you too as you embark on your own bilingual parenting adventure. First, a bit about me. Like I said, I'm American and I'm a native English speaker, and I was raised in a monolingual family. So yes, I am jealous of my own children and the fact that they are bilingual and that they speak French perfectly and that they seemingly learned it without putting in nearly as much effort as I had to put in to learn to speak French. I started studying French in middle school, so over 30 years ago. And I would say that I'm fluent in French, but I don't consider myself to be bilingual because for me, someone who is bilingual speaks two languages equally well, and I just don't think I'll ever get to that point with my French. And that's okay. I've come to accept that. I am an English teacher myself, in fact, and it's a career that I kind of fell into. When I was graduating from college, I was looking for a way that I could come back to France to live here for a little while to continue to work on my French. And I applied to the TEPIF program, and it's a program that still exists today. And if you're interested, you can check out the video in the description below because I talk more about that in another one of my videos on my channel. But the TEPIF program means that you are sponsored by the French government to come and to work in a French school as a language assistant for 7 months. And so I did that my first year out of college, and I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed teaching English, and it's turned into my career. At this point, I have over 20 years of teaching experience, 18 of which have been here in France. And when my kids came along, I knew that by raising them here in France, they would speak French perfectly. But I was also really concerned about making sure that they felt like English was their native language too. And I wanted them to make sure that they felt really comfortable speaking in English, because for me, it's kind of a link back to my culture and my family. And also, I thought that it could be really advantageous for them in their lives in other respects as well. For example, for work or for travel or just, internationally as a way to communicate with people from all over the world. But I wanted to figure out a way to make it possible while living here in France in a predominantly French-speaking environment. It's been a fascinating journey, and I've learned a lot along the way, so let's dive in and see how we did it. Now, there's this common belief that to truly learn a language, you need to be immersed in a country where that language is spoken. My students repeat this belief to me all the time. They tell me that in order for them to really progress in English, they feel like they need to go and live in an English-speaking country. And at one time, I agreed with them. At one time, I thought that was true. I used to say to them, yeah, if you want to get better at English, why don't you go and live and work in Ireland for a year? Or why don't you go woofing in Australia for 6 months? Based on my experience learning French, that belief seemed pretty accurate. I had taken French all through middle school, high school, and college. And despite my decent grades, pretty mediocre really, I still couldn't really express myself. I couldn't really have a deep conversation with people in France. I could kind of have a superficial exchange with them, but nothing really very meaningful, even after all of those years. And I certainly didn't really understand much in terms of French language literature, and I definitely didn't get, French humor or silly jokes in French movies. I just couldn't really communicate with people on a deeper level, even after all of those years of French classes. Personally, I only ever got to a decent level of comprehension and being able to express myself after coming and living here for almost a year after college. But that was over 20 years ago. And so despite even my best efforts to have some exposure to French while I was living in the States, I just don't think we had the same opportunities in terms of technology back then. So living here in France, being immersed in the French language really did help me personally progress in French. Now I can read contemporary literature in French and I enjoy it. I can watch movies and TV shows in French, although I still don't get all of the jokes. Um, I can sit through a long Sunday afternoon meal with my in laws and participate actively in the conversation and understand what's going on at the table. I gave birth twice in French hospitals in French without slipping into English. As part of my French citizenship application, I had to take a French test and I scored quite well. I'm fully operational now in French, but I still encounter words on an almost daily basis, I would say, that I don't know and that I have to look up, which is good. It's an ongoing learning process, of course. And then sometimes what's really funny is that I'll realize that I actually have no idea how a word or expression that I understand when I hear it is actually written. So I'm thinking of the expression entre autres, which is entre autres, which I used to think was entre autres, which does not exist at all. There's little things like that that happen to me all the time that make me aware of the fact that I still am not, again, bilingual in French. Anyway, for me, even after all these years, English is definitely still my dominant language. It's what comes out most naturally. It's still what my brain defaults to, even after all of these years of being immersed in French, living in France. But I know that if I had stayed in the States, I never would have gotten even to this level, the level that I am at today in French. So living here has definitely helped me to make progress in French. But here's the thing, and I think my opinion has shifted based on my experience of raising my kids to speak English while living here in France. Now I'm convinced that thanks to the technology that we have access to today and with the right approach, it's no longer necessary to live in a country where the language that you're trying to teach your children is actually being spoken. As I started raising my kids, I realized that there are ways that you can sort of create an artificial yet immersive environment. It's not only about where you are geographically and what language is being spoken outside of the home. It's about the language environment that you create inside your home, within the family. Luckily, our children's births coincided with the increased availability of all of this English language content on the internet and the technology that goes along with it, which is, of course, accessible to us here in France. All right, so let's break down the key strategies that worked for us. They are constant exposure, creating an English environment, real-life experience, and natural language acquisition. First and foremost, constant exposure. Actually, I think I started talking to my son, my oldest son, when he was still in utero to, get a jump on the English exposure before he was even born. And then when he was born, I would put him into his little baby carrier and I would walk around town just narrating everything that I saw. So he just had a sort of constant flow of English exposure outside of the apartment, inside the apartment. I would just be constantly commenting on everything that I saw and everything that was happening around us. Even when he was bigger and in a stroller, I would be constantly hunched over the stroller, pointing things out to him. And I even found photographic proof of this. Here we are in New York City in 2012, and I'm pointing out something that I thought would be very interesting to him. But here's the thing, it worked. This constant stream of English helped to create a rich language learning environment. Actually, it became my reflex to speak to all children in English, so even my kids' friends and my friends' kids, I speak to all children in English now, and I'm sure they all think I'm crazy, but I figure they all deserve a little exposure to English. It's good for them. Next, things are going to get a bit more technical here for a moment. Other techniques that I use with my kids and that I use in the classroom as well are types of corrective feedback called metalinguistic feedback and elicitation. And these are said to be more effective than just recasting or explicit correction. I learned about these techniques in an article I read during my master's degree. I did a master's in teaching English to speakers of other languages, and this article is by Lister and Ranta, and for some reason it just really stuck with me. The authors define metalinguistic feedback as containing either comments, information, or questions related to the well-formedness of the student's utterance without explicitly providing the correct form. And elicitation is different techniques used to elicit the correct language structure from learners. Let me give you an example of what this means in practice, so hopefully it will be easier to understand with this illustration. Just the other day, my youngest told me that he had tooken something. If I had simply corrected him, I would have stopped and I would have said, "You mean you had taken something?" Or if I recasted, I would have tried to subtly work into the conversation the correct form of the verb without explicitly pointing it out to him. So I would have said something like, "Oh, so you mean you had taken something? Oh, okay, tell me more." So I usually use either elicitation or metalinguistic feedback or just some improvised combination of the two. So I think in this case I said, "Tooken? Are you sure that's right? Do we say tooken in English?" And when he heard me say tooken, he knew it didn't sound right and he corrected himself and he said, "Oh no, taken." But it's probably pretty annoying to have your mom or even your English teacher interrupting you all the time to make these types of corrections, but it does seem like it works. According to the research, according to that article that I mentioned earlier, in their study sample, metalinguistic feedback led to language repair 45% of the time it was used compared to 46% for elicitation, meaning that the students actually fixed their mistakes, the language mistakes that they were making in class. And both of these techniques have a higher rate of success than recasting or explicit correction. And for that, that's why I tend to use them, because I find that also just in with my experience with my kids and with my students that these techniques do tend to seem to help students and my kids make better, faster progress in learning English. Next, I'm going to talk about books and other media that are crucial for creating an English-rich environment at home. We have made sure to have a great little selection of classic and newer English language books for children at home. And like our kids, our little English language library has grown over the years as well. This is the same bookshelf in 2013, 2016, and now today. Today it's overflowing and the kids have stacks more of books in their rooms as well. Here's an adorable photo from 2015, once little brother had come along, of the three of us reading about trains, and the baby is wearing a very hungry caterpillar onesie, and we even have the stuffed animal of the caterpillar himself, which my youngest later called Caterpillar when he started talking. So cute. I found bunches of pictures of my kids reading books in English with me, on their own, together. Here are a few more. Now my oldest has moved on to reading novels on his own, mostly in English, but sometimes in French as well. I did want to mention Harry Potter because that was an amazing amount of exposure. And I think the way it started was my mom was reading Harry Potter to my oldest son. And then I think at some point he started listening to them on audiobook. And I know that he listened to the entire series during the pandemic, and that was just massive amounts of exposure to English. It kept him busy and entertained and not watching a screen or using a screen during the pandemic. So that was great. And then he did show interest in reading the books. So I don't know if he went back and started from the beginning or if he just started where he left off with my mom, but he has also read the entire or most of the entire series as well. He's read the paper copy of the books. And so I think my younger son, well, if we can get him interested, he'll probably do the same. We'll see. My youngest is still at the stage where we're reading chapter books together. So our ritual is that what he'll do is he'll usually read the first page of each chapter of the book that we're reading, and then I'll finish reading the chapter out loud. So that's kind of our ritual before bedtime most nights, and it's really fun. It gives him a chance to read, and it gives us a chance to spend some time together most nights as well before bed. Another idea, which could probably get a little bit expensive, is to buy the same book, but to buy it in both languages that you're targeting. So, for example, I have this adorable photo op of my kids reading both versions of We Found a Hat. Actually, the version that we have here at home is the English version, and the photo is because I bought the French version and the English version for my son's teacher for Christmas one year, and I just couldn't pass up the opportunity to get the kids to take a photo with both versions of the book. But we do have some books in French and English, notably these tiny little Maurice Sendak books. Do you recognize these? Do you know these? This is actually a funny story because these were mine when I was a kid, and you can see I colored all over them. And they're just these adorable, cute little books. And one day I was downtown in Dijon. These are in English, obviously. One time I was downtown in Dijon and I found the same version of the tiny little books in French, and I just had to get them. And so these are definitely a favorite with my kids as well because they're funny, they rhyme, and the size is just too cute. My oldest son just asked me to buy him a copy of Pride and Prejudice, which I was only too happy to do. So I checked out the bookstore downtown and they did have it in English. But then I had an idea and I asked them if they could order this version for me, which they happily did. And this version is really cool because you have the original text, but then in the margins, you have explanations of tricky words or expressions in French. So you have the original text in English, and if you're reading along and you're not struggling and your comprehension is good, you don't have to stop and check. But if you're curious or if you need help, you have the explanations in the margins. So for example, here we have the word larder, and they give a little explanation in the margin, garde-manger. And later on the same page, unconcern as a noun. And here they give the translation as indifférence, indifference. So it's great, really practical, and definitely helps comprehension and means that you don't have to stop and look words up on your own. I know, well, I'm going to read this when he's done. I'm excited because it's probably going to help me learn some new French expressions, which is great. I know that I use this version of Animal Farm, which is from the same series with my students, and they really enjoy it. This book is much easier, obviously, than Pride and Prejudice, but it's the same idea, the original text, but with some explanations in the margins in English as well. So it's great. This is another option if you have access to these types of books. I imagine they exist for different languages and different classics all around the world. My youngest son loves podcasts as well, so he listens to a lot of podcasts in English and in French, and that's another way that he gets his dose of English as well. Another thing that the kids have is this Loonie. It's a story box, and they've had it since Christmas 2018. I found this photo from January 2019 of them playing with their Loonie, listening to stories on the Loonie, and it's great. They still ask me to download new stories to put on their Loonie, and we have stories in French and in English and in other languages too, which they don't necessarily understand, but it's fun that they're on here too. So for example, we have Oh Pirates. So choose your own adventure pirate stories. The Rainbow Kingdom. I'm not sure what that's about. French aviators from the First World War, and there's lots of different stories and different themes that you can pick, that kids can pick, and then they get to, choose their own adventure and listen to the stories, and they really enjoy it. They love this thing. And in terms of movies and TV shows, our rule is that anything that is originally produced in English, they watch in English. And it's not even something that we have to enforce because our kids don't like to watch movies or TV shows that are dubbed from English into French. They find that frustrating anyway. Now they're happy to watch everything in English. And they do watch some things in French if they are originally produced in French. But if the movie or the TV show is originally in English, they watch it in English. And all of this exposure is great. For one thing, I always wanted to make sure that my kids kind of got idiomatic expressions. For example, I wanted them to, hear the expression, oh, it came out of left field, and know what it meant and sort of understand where that expression maybe came from. And I think they do. And also because they do have so much exposure to podcasts and Netflix and such, they're often telling me interesting things that they've learned as well. So not only are they getting exposure to English, but oftentimes it's quite educational, and sometimes it's just silly and fun, and that's fine too. But I think that it's not just me. Like, I'm not the only one that's in charge of making sure that they have exposure to all of these sort of cultural references, and they are getting access to those thanks to all of the media that we have and all of the exposure that they have to all of that here at home. And of course, writing is important too, although I have to say that they've had a much smaller dose of writing here at home. I do have them write letters to friends and family in the States frequently, and then sometimes in the summer I'll make them do dictation dictations. So this is something that they do in French school a lot. So I'll write little sentences and then I'll read them out loud, and the kids have to write what they hear. And so it kind of helps them with spelling and grammar, I guess, in a sense. And then something else that I've had them do a couple times when we've traveled to the States is I have them keep a travel journal, and I let them pick if they want to do it in English or in French. But it's funny because oftentimes when we're immersed in English in the States, they'll just use English. It will just come naturally to them to write in English, and I don't check it or correct it or anything like that. They're just, I just, encourage them to write what we do every day in their little travel journals, which they seem to enjoy. And finally, music. In terms of like nursery rhymes and classic kid songs and lullabies, I think that they know the basics in both French and English, but I don't really get the sense that I've done a great job in this domain. I remember making a reference very recently, like in the last week, about Baba Black Sheep, and they had no idea what I was talking about. And I was like, oh no, I failed. But I am reassured because they do have pretty good taste, well, similar to my own, I should say, in terms of American and English language pop and rock. They do know a lot of American and English language music as well. So maybe I failed with the lullabies and the nursery rhymes, but they still know a fair amount of music. And again, I think it's just great because it gives them another chance to use their English and in a fun way for them. Next, moving on to real life experiences, and nothing beats real life experiences. And it's not just about the language, right? It's about establishing and maintaining that relationship with those people that you love and cherish using English. And so my kids are really lucky because they have friends in the States, and of course they have my family as well, with whom they communicate exclusively in English, and that's really important for them, and it's been a great experience for them as well. From a very young age, we have used FaceTime and other technology to allow our kids to communicate with my friends and family that way. But we've also been lucky enough to be able to take our kids to the States several times as well. So we took family vacations to the States the summers that my oldest son, was turning 1, 2, 3, and 5. And then my oldest son started spending longer amounts of time in the States on his own, starting at age 7. So he flies on Air France, which allows kids to travel internationally as unaccompanied minors starting at age 5. So the first time we did that for him, he was 7 years old. And I think that summer we had all flown to the US. And then my husband, my younger son, and I, we flew back to France, but my oldest son stayed behind, and he stayed with my mom for a few weeks. And so that was an amazing experience for him, which we decided to then do again the following summer. And the following summer, I think my mom came and had been staying with us. And then when she left, she flew back to the States with our oldest son, and who then stayed with her for a few weeks. And then he flew back on his own a few weeks later. And then the following summer, we did the same thing where the 4 of us flew over, and then 3 of us flew back. And my oldest son stayed a few weeks extra with my mom and then flew back to France on his own a few weeks later. And then in the summer of 2022, both of my kids flew together alone to the States, and they were there for a few weeks, and then they both flew back, just the 2 of them together on their own a few weeks later. And our most recent trip to the States was in 2023, the summer of 2023, and we did the same thing where the 4 of us all flew to the States together, and then my husband and I stayed for 3 weeks, and we flew back to France, and we left the kids behind for I think 2 more weeks to stay with my mom and to hang out with my mom and get some good grandmotherly time and have some summer fun in the States on their own. So cumulatively, I haven't counted the number of weeks he spent in the States, but he has spent a significant amount of time there, my oldest son in particular. And he has in the past gone to camp at the YMCA. He's gone to soccer camp. In 2022, they both went to day camp, and they really enjoyed that. And it just gives them the chance to really spend some quality time, just hanging out with my mom in her neighborhood, with their cousins in their neighborhood, just sort of, I don't know, soaking up the American culture and the English language as well. Next, I wanted to talk about natural language acquisition in a sense. And in preparing for this video the other night at dinner, I asked my kids, so what are your memories of the English language learning process? And without missing a beat, they flipped it around on me and they said, well, what are your memories of your English language learning process? And I thought about it for a moment and I was like, I don't know. I don't have any memories of that. It happened before my memories really started. And they said, yeah, it's the same for us. So I was a bit reassured because when they were starting to learn English, I was a bit stubborn with them and a bit annoying probably because they would do things like you try to see if I would give in when they used words in French. So for example, they would ask for a cuillère. And if I knew they knew the word in English, then I would stubbornly be like, what? What do you want? And I wouldn't give in until they found the word in English, until they said spoon. And then finally I would give them the object that they wanted. And I realized at dinner the other night that they don't seem to have any recollection of this, which is reassuring in a sense. I also have to remind myself that the language learning process can be very long. It is very long, in fact. And I'm just thinking about my son, for example, who is almost 10 years old, and the fact that he still struggles with the TH sounds. So he often says dis instead of this. And if I stop him and ask him to focus on the pronunciation, he can do it. It's fine. It's just that it's inconsistent. But I know that TH is a sound, are sounds that come later for many kids. And so he'll get it eventually, and it's not a race. It's just a long process, and it's just going to take time, and that's okay. Now moving on to a few challenges and observations, because this has not always been smooth sailing, of course. I do remember, for one thing, my mother-in-law was worried that our kids wouldn't know how to speak French before they went to school. But she shouldn't have worried because they had lots of French exposure, not only from my husband and from their daycare, but from friends and family like her as well. So my older son may have been a little late in his acquisition of language, something that I did notice compared to the other kids when he started school. I think that maybe his vocabulary was a bit not as developed. This is not something I noticed with my younger son, however, and I chalk that up to his exposure to his older brother and being stimulated constantly by his older brother as well. But I do think that my younger son maybe started speaking in more complex sentences, for example, a bit later than some of the peers in his class. And I do remember being a little bit worried about that at times, but also knowing that it was probably normal because he was learning two languages at the same time. So I didn't worry too much about it. And just to reassure you, if you are a parent of a child who is being raised bilingually, who may be starting to talk a little bit later than some of their peers, don't worry. My son is 14 now, and he has made up for any delays that he may have had earlier. He talks all the time, and he's reading big, ambitious classic novels in English now too, so your kid will catch up too, don't worry. Something else I remember happening that I was a bit worried about was that one time my son's preschool teacher told me in a surprised manner that my son did not know the names of the days of the week in English. And like, she told me as if I should be worried about that. And I was, because the teacher told me I should be worried. And then I sort of stopped myself and I thought about it, and I was like, no, it's okay. He knows plenty of other words in English. It's okay if he doesn't know the days of the week. It's okay. And one last funny story was that one time my son told his teacher that I didn't speak French. And so she was surprised at some point when I interacted with her and I could speak in French. And I kind of took that as a badge of honor. I was like, okay, this is great. They don't even think I can speak French. So at that point, I guess he had internalized that I wanted him to be speaking to me in English only. I think they've realized since then that I do speak French, but we've gotten over the hump and they don't try to use their French on me anymore. So as we wrap up, I just want to leave you with a few key principles. I think the concept is really straightforward. Just provide a lot of exposure in the target language. It kind of just requires a lot of effort and consistency. Focus on meaningful exposure and interaction when possible. It's not about drilling grammar or learning vocabulary or anything like that. It's about interacting with the people that matter to you, that matter to your kid. And it's about, enjoying the books and the TV shows and the movies that they're interested in as well. But making sure that they have those opportunities for real interaction is really important as well. Prioritize laps, not apps. I think I heard this in reference to reading skills, but I think it holds true for second language acquisition as well. I think the idea is that reading with your kid on your lap, having the child have the opportunity to ask you questions and to, for you to be able to encourage them to read or to repeat after you or just to talk about the story that you're reading together, that's such a valuable experience for kids. And I think that that's definitely true in language acquisition as well, because it gives your child the chance to really use the language and to see how it works and to hear the stories being read to them, but also have the chance to talk to you or talk to, their grandparent or whoever is reading them the story or whoever is playing with them. So I think that's a good piece of advice as well. To conclude, raising bilingual kids is a journey, and every family's path will be unique. But I hope that sharing our experience has given you some encouragement and maybe some good ideas that you might want to try out as well. And I just want to tell you that you're doing a great job and that it's really an incredible gift and an opportunity for your kids if you're helping them to become bilingual. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments below. And if you got any value out of this video, it would be really great if you could go ahead and like it or subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching today, and until the next time, a bientôt!